Welcome to the first installment of Intriguing People. My name is Brandy, and I find that some of the most intriguing people are those that many have not heard of, except maybe in passing. On this channel, I won't be looking at Albert Einstein, George Washington, or any of those personalities that are more widely known. I am looking for people that led amazing lives and have disappeared into relative obscurity to most people. Now, before I get started, I humbly ask that if you like this video, then please hit the like button. If you want to be notified of future installments, which I plan on adding twice a month, then please subscribe. I'm just getting started and would appreciate the support. Our very first intriguing person is Victoria Alice Elizabeth Julia Marie, formerly known as Princess Alice of Battenberg. Most know her son, Prince Philip, better than her. He was her youngest and the only boy of her 5 children. Alice, she had several titles throughout her life, but I will mostly shorten her name to Alice for brevity, was born on the 25th of February in 1885. She was called Alice by her family and formerly known as Princess Andrew of Greece and Denmark after her marriage to Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark. Born in the latter part of the 19th century, she became one of the 20th century's most intriguing women. Living through and participating in 2 world wars and several other conflicts, she witnessed drastic changes in Europe and the world. Alice was born into a royal lineage. She was the daughter of Prince Louis of Battenberg and Princess Victoria of Hesse and by Rhine. By Rhine meaning by the Rhine River in Germany, or what is now Germany. Her birth was witnessed by her great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, at Windsor Castle. She spent some of her childhood in Great Britain, but also spent parts of her childhood in Germany and Malta. Alice's time on the island of Malta was due to her father's position with the British Royal Navy. He signed on at 14 and would have a career of over 40 years, often being absent from home. Her father was descended from a morganatic marriage. Morganatic literally means marriage with a morning gift. This means that the wife and her offspring do not inherit anything except gifts given by the husband. This meant that Prince Louis did not inherit his father's duchy, but did inherit a title from his mother, Julia, Princess of Battenberg. Alice's mother was Princess Victoria of Hesse and by Rhine, granddaughter of Queen Victoria. I won't delve too far into the many convolutions of royal marriages, as I want to keep the focus on Alice, but it is interesting to note that her parents were first cousins once removed. Whether this was a factor in Alice being born congenitally deaf is not my place to say, although it does make one wonder. Although she was deaf, Alice was sheltered and had the best private tutors to help her overcome this deficit. She quickly learned to read lips and to speak both English and German. When she married Prince Andrew, she also learned Greek. She was definitely not lacking in intelligence. Although she was raised in a protective bubble, Alice frequently attended royal events such as weddings and was seen at her beloved great-grandmother Victoria's funeral at the age of 15. Princess Alice met her future husband, Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, when she was 17, and they were both attending the coronation of Edward VII in 1902. They married the following year when she was 18. Andrew was 3 years her senior. With their marriage, the couple together had familial ties to the ruling houses of the United Kingdom, Germany, Russia, Denmark, and Greece. The couple would go on to have 5 children. Princess Margarita was born in 1905, Princess Theodora in 1906, Princess Cecily in 1911, Princess Sophia in 1914, and finally, the baby, Prince Philip, was born in 1921. After their marriage, Prince Andrew was often away at sea, and Alice began to busy herself with charity work, something that would become a staple in her life. 5 years into their marriage, the couple traveled in 1908 to attend the wedding of Grand Duchess Maria of Russia and Prince Wilhelm of Sweden. While in Russia, Alice spoke in detail with her aunt, the Grand Duchess Elizabeth Fyodorovna. She helped Elizabeth formulate plans for a religious order of nurses. Later that same year, Elizabeth gave away all her possessions to prepare for a more spiritual life. This would set an example for Alice in the future. For their trip to Russia in 1908, it should be remembered that travel of great distances was not easy. Different modes of transport would be used at different points, including train, boat, and wagon. Once arriving, there would have been many social engagements surrounding the wedding. It was by far not a quick ceremony or celebration. This meant that the Prince and Princess Andrew would have been gone from Greece for many months. Upon returning home, the political situation in Greece had become quite dire. I will try to keep a summary of events through the next 15 years or so brief, but I feel it is important to understand the turmoil that Alice and her family went through. Although she undoubtedly had nannies and staff, she was still a wife and a mother to several young children during very difficult times. The Young Turk Revolution broke out in the Ottoman Empire in July of 1908, bringing the entire region into flux. I won't go into a long lesson on Greek politics, but there was a lot of dissension around bringing Crete under Greek rule. A group of young Greek officers formed a group called the Military League to emulate the Ottomans and seek governmental reforms. Prince Andrew was a senior officer in the Greek army and subsequently resigned, attempting to distance himself from the turmoil. It would not be a far stretch to say that this caused a fair bit of stress for his family, including wife Alice. This turmoil continued through to the Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913, in which a number of Christian Balkan states declared war on the Ottoman Empire. Greece was one of these, and the war induced Prince Andrew to once again join the army. While he was busy with the main war effort, Alice took an active role by setting up field hospitals and nursing the injured. This would be just a year after she gave birth to her third child, Princess Cecily. The First Balkan War ended in 1913, but was soon followed by the Second Balkan War due to dissatisfaction in the dividing of territories after the war. Fighting continued, with Greece ultimately the victor, gaining enough territory to greatly increase in size. It was after the end of the war in 1913 that King George would award Alice the Royal Red Cross in recognition of her efforts during the war assisting in field hospitals. This map here illustrates the area of dispute during the Balkan Wars and shows how far the Ottoman Empire was pushed back from the area. Crete was a major point of contention and became firmly part of Greece after the wars. Also, you can see Corfu on the northwest side of Greece. This is where the royal family lived when not in Athens. Despite the initial victory, an anarchist would assassinate King George, Alice's father-in-law, later in 1913. George's eldest son, Prince Andrew's brother, became King Constantine. Peace eventually settled for a time, and with it came a new baby, Princess Sophia, born in 1914. The next major crisis was one that was far more wide-reaching. World War I began in July of 1914. Initially, Greece attempted to maintain a neutral stance, largely out of fear of the British Navy. Prime Minister Venizelos of Greece disagreed with neutrality and resigned, only to then be re-elected in 1915. He attempted to invite Allied forces into Greece, which then caused the king to dismiss him. This illustrates how much turmoil was ongoing in even a technically neutral country at the time. This map shows the division of powers in World War I. Even though Greece shows as allied, it did try to initially maintain neutrality. Also, this shows the Ottoman Empire as part of the Central Powers, which Greece had recently fought in the Balkan Wars. Additionally, this shows how the Balkan states divided during this time. As the war continued, Venizelos established a separatist government that took control of the new Greek lands that had been gained after the Balkan Wars, effectively dividing the country. King Constantine, Alice's brother-in-law, kept control of the historical lands for a time. In February of 1917, the French attacked on behalf of the Allies, including a devastating bombing of Athens. During this time, Alice and her children would spend their time sheltering in the palace cellars. Disagreement between the Royalists and Venizelos' supporters led to the National Schism in 1917 that sent most of the royal family into exile in Switzerland. At this point, Greece joined the Allied cause. World War I concluded in 1918 and saw many European dynasties ended. Prince Andrew's father relinquished his German titles and anglicized his name to Mountbatten. The next day, King George V of the UK made him a Marquess. Two of Alice's aunts in Russia, including Elizabeth, were murdered by the Bolsheviks. Much of the former Ottoman Empire was divided up among the victors. Not everyone was happy with the divisions, and strife continued internally in Greece until Venizelos lost the election in 1920. King Constantine was then welcomed back to try to bring peace to the country. At this time, Alice and her family returned to the country and resided on Corfu. Peace of a sort lasted again only briefly. In September of 1922, an uprising of Venizelos supporting officers forced King Constantine to abdicate in favor of his eldest son, who became King George II. Senior military officials were also tried at this time, including Prince Andrew. Upon being found guilty, he was pardoned and then banished from the country. At this time, King George V ordered the Royal Navy to evacuate the family from Corfu. Prince Philip was just 18 months old and was hidden in an orange crate to be loaded onto the ship. Following their evacuation, Alice and her family settled into exile in Paris. The city hosted a number of Greek refugees, and Alice became active in assisting with food and medical care for the displaced. She gradually became more religious during this time and converted to the Greek Orthodox Church in 1928. Soon after she converted, Alice claimed to be receiving divine messages and to have healing powers. There is some speculations that she may also have been suffering from some degree of PTSD. The family had her analyzed, and she was diagnosed schizophrenic and committed to a sanatorium in Switzerland that hosted a number of notable and famous people. She denied the diagnosis and insisted she was sane, trying to leave the sanatorium a number of times. At this time, her daughters ranged in age from 14 to 23. Prince Philip was just 7 and was sent to stay with his uncle in Britain. During her time at the sanatorium, Alice was treated by Sigmund Freud, who diagnosed her with sexual frustration. The proposed cure was a course of X-ray treatments of her ovaries. While this obviously did nothing to help, it did lead to future lifelong health problems. Eventually, she fled the sanatorium after 2 years, during which Prince Andrew had visited only once. After her successful escape, she spent the next 7 years traveling around Europe incognito. There is little documentation from this time, as Alice did not wish to speak of it herself. Alice's exile ended in 1937 with tragedy. Her daughter Cecily, son-in-law, and 2 grandchildren died in an air accident. She saw Prince Andrew at the funeral for the first time in 6 years. The one positive was that this brought about a reconciliation with the family. Although she was now reconciled, Alice returned to Greece, a country she had come to love. She poured herself into her work with the poor, while she lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment. Her world would be thrown into turmoil once again with the outbreak of World War II in 1939. This would cause a painful division within her family, with 2 of her son-in-laws fighting for Germany, while her son Philip served in the Royal Navy. Axis forces occupied Athens in 1941, and most of the Greek royal family remained in exile. Alice and her sister-in-law, Princess Nicholas, remained in Greece. She moved to her brother-in-law's house during the war. This placed her in central Athens, where she worked for the Red Cross and organized soup kitchens. She also notably took a trip to visit her sister, Crown Princess Louise, in Sweden. This trip allowed her to bring back medical supplies. In addition to her medical aid, she organized shelters for children and nursing care in poor neighborhoods. In 1943, the fall of Mussolini led to Germany occupying Athens and deporting Jews sheltering there. The family of Haimaki Cohen had served King George I of Greece, who had placed his family in their debt if ever needed. The Cohen family called in the favor, which Alice fulfilled by sheltering members of the family. After several years of dwindling supplies and little food, Athens was liberated by the British in 1944. When the British Prime Minister visited Alice in the city, he found her living with little more resources than those she had been aiding for years. Once again, even though it seemed that war was ending for Greece, the country still saw fighting. Communist guerrillas fought the British for control of Athens, and during this time, Alice received the news that her husband had been killed. They had not seen each other since 1939. While the fighting continued in Athens, Alice continued to walk the streets, distributing rations to children and police. When told that she could get hit by a stray bullet, she replied, "They tell me that you don't hear the shot that kills you, and in any case, I am deaf, so why worry about that?" The war finally ended in 1945 and saw Alice return to the UK when Philip was engaged to marry Princess Elizabeth in 1947. Her daughters, though, were not invited due to anti-German sentiment. After the wedding, Alice spent some time in England before returning back to Athens. In January of 1949, she founded a nursing order of Greek Orthodox nuns, the Christian Sisterhood of Martha and Mary. This was modeled on the convent that her aunt had founded in Russia. The order was housed in the northern part of Athens. To fund the efforts of the new order, Alice took fundraising trips to the US in 1950 and 1952. The order eventually failed, though, due to lack of applicants. Alice's mother always had doubts, once being quoted as, "What can you say of a nun who smokes and plays canasta?" in reference to Alice. With her convent closed, Alice continued her spiritual pursuits and began to study Eastern philosophies. In 1960, she visited India as part of her ongoing spiritual quest, but became ill during the trip and had to leave sooner than planned. She returned to her beloved Athens, but her health continued to suffer, and she left Greece for the last time in 1967 when the colonel's coup took control of the city. Her son and daughter-in-law invited her to reside at Buckingham Palace, and she would live the last years of her life in Great Britain. Although Alice's health continued to decline, reports of senility were denied, much as reports of mental problems had been earlier in her life, and she remained lucid until the end. She passed away from a series of health issues in Buckingham Palace on December 5, 1969. Alice had initially requested to be buried in Jerusalem, but her daughters objected that she would be too far away. Instead, she was initially buried in the royal crypt in St. George's Chapel in Windsor Castle. In 1988, her final wish to be buried near her Aunt Elizabeth, who had been named a Russian Orthodox saint, in the convent of St. Mary Magdalene in Gethsemane on the Mount of Olives was granted when her remains were moved. This is a picture of Princess Alice's final resting place on the Mount of Olives. I looked for but could not find pictures of her funeral or resting place at Windsor Castle. I find that this is somehow appropriate that the only pictures that remain show her where she wished to finally rest. As a final note to a remarkable life, on October 31st, 1994, Prince Philip and his sister Princess George of Hanover went to Jerusalem to witness their mother being named as righteous among the nations for her work hiding the Cohens during the war. She was also named a hero of the Holocaust by the British government. And so ends an amazing life that saw more than anyone could dream.